the worst we talked about a ton this season in general, the Las Vegas Falcons. And I think we talked about them for good reason because we expected them to be the worst team in the league coming into the season. They were far worse than either of us could have imagined because they went 20 consecutive matches to start the season without a win. They started 0-20, and at one point, or I guess at a few points, we both kind of second guessed ourselves because we said at the beginning of the year, well, they're going to be really bad, but there's no way that they're not going to be able to win a single match. When you go 0-20 to start the year, I think there's good reason why we would, okay, maybe they might go the entire season. Fortunately for Vegas and their fans, they did win one match. They actually won 3 matches this season and finished with a 3-28 record, which I looked it up. I had to make sure. It was very close to the worst record in CDL history, but it is technically not.
Wow.
The Paris Legion,
Paris. Yeah.
yeah. So Paris Legion in 2022 went 2-23, which so they have fewer losses, but also one less win. And what I was kind of going off of was the win percentage for these teams because of how different the number of matches can be season to season. So the Legion had an 8% win percentage in 2022, where Vegas had a 10%, a really high win percentage, I would say. So they went 3-28, 10% win percentage. In terms of maps, they were actually worse than the Paris Legion, if I remember correctly. I didn't write it down in the notes, but Vegas was 26-89 in maps, which was a 23% map win percentage, and I believe Paris was like 30%, because they did lose a ton of game fives that season as well. And I looked it up, and I was actually doing this for Minnesota, but then I went back and I did it for all of the bottom 4 teams. The game 5 record for the Vegas Falcons was 40% win percentage. They went 2-3 this season. Their 2 of their 3 wins were in game 5. The only one, funnily enough, was against Optic. The first win was a 3-1 win, and then they won 3-2, I think, against Minnesota and who?
Beat Vancouver at the last major.
Yeah, in Vancouver.
I knew Vancouver and Optic. I didn't remember the Minnesota, but I do remember the Minnesota one now because that was during the hunt for champs, ironically.
Yeah, yeah. So Vegas, they win those 2 game 5s, but I just thought that was funny that of like the bottom 4 teams, they had like the second best map or game 5 win percentage. Where do you want to go from here with Vegas? Because this was the I mean, it was one of the worst seasons in CDL history. I don't know what you do necessarily if you're Vegas going into the off season. And something that you mentioned before we went on there was Esports World Cup being in Saudi Arabia. How does that affect what they do
Yeah.
next? So if you're Clayster or if you're whoever is running, the operation of the Vegas Falcons, what are you
Then
looking to do? Yeah. What are you looking to do this off season?
yeah, I'll get to that esports World Cup and
Yeah.
off-season stuff in a second. We can even circle back to that, but really, I do want to just like, kind of like you did, look at the season as a whole, and I do think it is important to pay attention to like really the 2 distinct halves of the season, even if they aren't, exactly a 50-50 split in the matches or whatnot, but like for lack of a better term, we have the all Saudi project and then the the
The regular project.
sure XNID plus NA players project, but then you can't even say NA because of Pred, but whatever. So like looking at it in those 2 ways, we, as you said, we very early on with the all Saudi project, we could have been very negative to start the season. But when they first started playing, it definitely did look like they had the potential to at least cause an upset. The thing holding them back, which obviously the stats back up, was the hard point. They could not win a hard point. They struggled in respawns, but there were moments from all the players, even the players who were quickly rotated out, like King Abadi, like it was very apparent early on that these players, it wasn't like, just recruit bots were being thrown into a lobby. Like these guys could shoot, and definitely like kicks and Xnid stood out above the others, but it gave, I don't think false hope is necessarily the right word, but it definitely like gave the impression that something could happen here with this team. And
Yeah,
by saying that, I don't mean like they're gonna win the major or win champs, but
they could win
it definitely
matches.
felt, I after seeing them play, it felt like they were going to actually win some series, and I did not think that beforehand. At the same time, one thought that I had when the roster was first announced, and um throughout the early portions of the season, was that especially it was the Luti um being released, or whatever that coaching change was. That was really the big turning point, I feel like, for this
Yeah.
the all Saudi project. But before that happened, like everything with kicks and the first few roster moves where they brought players in that were also Saudi from their bench slash academy roster, it felt like they were going to stick with this all Saudi project for the long haul.
Hmm.
And we mentioned that numerous times. It didn't feel like they were going to pivot quickly. It felt like this whole season was going to go that direction for the All Saudi project. It felt like, um, at least to me, when we were comparing it with other Falcons esports teams where they have dropped the mega bag, allegedly, reportedly, for some high profile players, it felt like they were going away from that in this first year in the CDL, which is, end of the day, it is important to remember this is their first year in the CDL.
Yeah.
But it felt like they weren't going to take that, luxurious route of being a big spender, and they were going to try to make this all Saudi project work. And at the end of the day, that's, I think the main takeaway for me from this team is that I do think as I think it's very commendable that they wanted to try to make the all Saudi project work. I think they gave it probably more time than some other teams would have done if they were doing like region-based rosters that were struggling as
Yeah.
much as the team. But I also think at the same time it would have been very easy, even with the struggles, for them to continue to do the all Saudi project and just let it ride. A team like the Paris Legion, beforehand, if they were in a similar situation with like an all French roster and they were historically bad, and we know like the reportedly what their spending habits were and all that, it wouldn't have surprised me if they just like were like, oh, we don't care if we're 0-20 in hardpoint or whatever, just
Hmm.
keep doing what you can, boys. So as a whole, I think, it seems apparent that now that they went with the all Saudi project, didn't work, they quickly pivoted to this roster they have now, where they, at least the rumblings, and I haven't heard anything concrete, but it definitely, most people, and it could just be perception from those other the moves by Falcons and other esports, but it seems like most people think that Falcons just gave Pred the bag to come play for Vegas. That could be the direction they're heading in going forward. It also, they've kept Xnid on the team for this season, and I think he's played pretty well, especially given the circumstances and the constant changes around him. His first year playing at this level, playing overseas, or playing in the CDL at the highest level. Um, so I think, going into next year, I wasn't gonna jump ahead in case you have anything to say, but yeah, go ahead if you got anything else.
I just think it's they deserve credit for trying something new
Hmm.
for them. Uh, a Saudi player had never been in the CDL before this year, and now 7 Saudi players have been in the CDL as a result of the project that you mentioned. They started out with that all Saudi roster. They brought in 3 more players that were on their academy roster throughout the season, and then after Major 2, and shortly after Clayster replaced Luti as the head coach, then they go and they shift their focus. And Uh, I think the Pred thing is probably true. Like they probably did drop a pretty big bag because for him, there's no reason for him to go to Vegas, at least this past season, unless it was either you get a lot of money now or it is, they told him, hey, like, you come here now and we can build around you in the off season, basically, like when we're able to compete for free agents. Because I'm sure Pred, like even if it's a lot of money, like he still wants to compete. So it does. There is kind of the push and pull of that, of the financial gain versus the competitiveness of a player like him that literally just won a world championship less than a year ago. So um, if he's not on the roster next season, I think that's like kind of disappointing unless they can build another roster that is up to par with a player like Pred being on your team. So I think it's going to be a pretty interesting offseason, all things considered, for Vegas. But I did want to talk about what you said about Esports World Cup, obviously, because that is something I hadn't even thought of. But what do you think? How do you think Esports World Cup could affect their plans, at least in the short term, for the roster?
Yeah, just to cap what you said there too on Pred. I mean,
Mm,
if they don't keep Pred, or I mean, maybe Pred gets an offer from another team that he can't turn down.
yeah.
But if we ever see a tweet like Pred is a free agent or anything, that should indicate, um, the type of deal that he signed with this team. And I would, if I see Pred tweets he's an unrestricted free agent after Esports World Cup, I would lean towards thinking Vegas didn't give him like a supermax contract. Maybe they gave him a little bit of a nice payday, but it might not be that generous bag that many people were thinking, and that could play a factor in the rest of their offseason moves. But going forward to what you said, yeah, the one thing that I've been thinking about really with this Vegas team, especially as it pertains to Esports World Cup, since they won't be at champs and they have time to practice. I saw I put it in the Discord, like Clay tweeted out sort of like his summary of
This season, yeah.
the first season. Yeah, and he said something about them taking a break or whatever. So don't know how long that's going to be, and don't know if that break will result in them deciding to make any roster changes with the current roster before Esports World Cup. Um, but the big question mark for me, really, with this Vegas roster is Kicks, and all we know about Kicks' situation, at least as far as I remember, is that he went back home to Saudi Arabia early on in the season due to personal reasons,
Hmm.
and we don't know if those issues or whatever is going on have been resolved and whatnot. But if they have, and he's in Saudi Arabia, he becomes a interesting option for this roster for Esports World Cup. A team with Pred, Kicks, Xnid, and then one of even Priesta or Arcides, or maybe another Saudi player or somebody else entirely. But that three, I'll say core three for lack of a better term, core three of Pred, Xnid, and Kicks, just based on the small sample size we saw of Kicks in his CDL debut, that's pretty interesting. And I think it would generate a lot of attention for the Saudi fans in attendance at the event, and just up there. I mean, even non-Saudi fans who saw Kicks play early in the season and were able to just get a glimpse of what his potential could be. That could be just an exciting prospect, or an exciting idea in terms of giving him another chance. It could also just be a thing where he's unable to play and it doesn't matter and we won't see him, and Vegas is going to show up to this event with Pred, Xnid, Priesta, and Arcides as the roster. So I do think that's an interesting idea. Just I don't know if anybody else has talked about it, or I haven't seen anything on Kicks really since the stuff going on early in the season. So I don't know how much is being said about if it's even a possibility. But that's just something that came to mind to me, and I think it would be kind of cool to see him back in the fray, just based on the small sample size and the taste of what he was able to produce in his brief sample size early in the season.
I didn't really think about him for EWC, but I definitely had him in mind for next season because he did show a lot of promise in the very short time that he had in the CDL. He probably showed the most promise of any of these Saudi players, Exnid included, even though Exnid definitely toward the end of the season got a lot more, I guess, more respect in terms
Yeah.
of like him as a legitimate Call of Duty League player. But yeah, that's like a big question is like, what is his status? What does the future hold for him? And another part of it is just how important is the Saudi representation aspect in general? Like, does there need to be like one Saudi player on this team moving forward, regardless of who else is on the team? Or, what if they go into a season, are they going to be like, well, this has to be half Saudi? Like, what is the goal here? Is it to actually have Saudi representation on your team, or is it to put together the best team regardless of nationality and background? I think that's we'll probably learn that pretty quickly
Yeah.
because EWC will probably be the test, at least the first test.
I would be surprised if they completely scrapped any Saudi representation for
Yeah.
um just for lack of a better example I can come up to. It feels like Xnet is going to be Vegas's Snoopy, what
Yeah.
Snoopy is to Boston. Um, yeah, I actually don't know how young Xnet is. I don't think he's super young, but I don't think he's old. Um, but either it feels like he's like this guy that they gave his first chance to, and they're gonna see what he's capable of, and 1 year might not be enough of a sample size, so they're gonna stick with him. Could be completely off here, and we could be looking at 4 NA players on Vegas if they do go down the route that we've seen the organization do in other esports. But my gut feeling right now is that Xnid, if you had to ask me right now what I think Vegas's roster is going to look like next year for the CDL, even beyond Esports World Cup, I mean, unless there's something catastrophic that happens there and they just like don't even win a map and they decide to blow it up completely. Outside of that, I think team of two, Pred and Xnid, and then those other two spots could be NA players, could be Kicks and one NA player. I mean, could be an EU player if they, someone like Afro even they could maybe give him a chance just because he's played well in challengers this year. I don't know, but I would be surprised if they didn't build around Pred and Kicks, or sorry, Pred and Xnid, and that is also contingent upon Pred's contract situation, which we don't really know. So there are questions around Vegas, but I think it's one of the teams that I'm more interested in to see exactly what they do in the offseason. Some of these other teams we're going to talk about even in this show, like they could literally do anything, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's something they can do, but I think just the fact that there are multiple directions I could see this team going in based on what they have here has me a little excited about what Vegas could do.
According to Gamepedia, Xnid's been with the Falcons organization since 2021, February
Okay.
21. So, I mean, I think in general they like him. They
Yeah.
probably are pretty committed to him. He's 22, so basically since he's been eligible to compete in challengers or the CDL, he's been with this organization. So I think that's probably a good sign that if there is going to be Saudi representation, I do agree with you that there probably will be one player at the very least. Xnid probably will be that player, like unless Kicks is able to come back and they really have confidence that he's going to be able to make an impact. But the last point you made of like this team has so many different avenues they could go on. Like there's not they don't feel limited like some of these other teams do in like what moves they can make, and it's because of the money. Like the fact that we've
Yeah.
heard they spent reportedly millions of dollars for a single Counter-Strike player. They've done this multiple times where they have gotten big name players or big name coaches to sign with the Falcons, or they've acquired them in some way. And if they can do that, or if they do that, I guess, because I think they can, but if they want to do that in the CDL, then that changes kind of the landscape of the entire league. Because right now, we have Optic is by far the most popular, and I think they have the advantage in terms of that popularity and also money. But like I think the popularity might be even more important to a lot of these players because like if you could also just look at it as like I'm going to make more money as a result of being with Optic, even if I don't sign the biggest contract with Optic to start. Because I'll have the streamer the stream numbers. Shotzi has thousands of viewers every time he goes live, in large part because he's with Optic and he's been with Optic for several years. So there's that. But we also have FaZe and LAT. We'll see what happens with C9. Like in general, like they're of the brands in the
Yeah.
CDL, they're among the biggest, but that didn't play out this year, I would say. But other than that, like they're I don't know what the salary numbers are either with those teams. So like maybe they're able to, and I want to just go through this real quick because I have this for every team, keeper cut, and I listed the last roster that they fielded in the season plus their head coach. So for Vegas, it's Exnid, Pred, Arcides, Priesta, and Clayster because he replaced Luti during the season. I love Clay, so I'm probably not gonna get rid of him. Also, he had his first year as a coach. He wasn't the head coach to start. I don't know if he had this in mind or necessarily even what he had in mind in terms of a roster. So who knows where they go? I would say probably just run it back with Clay. I made it clear how I feel about Arcees and Priesta coming into this roster. It felt like they just needed some like CDL or like high challengers level talent to fill out this roster, and it probably does feel like Pred and Exnid are the two players that they keep, and then the other two. Let's be honest, like if they're willing to spend, they can get pretty much anybody, right? Like they could. It's going to be probably hard to pry away Shotzi or Dashy from Optic, for example. And I don't know what the situation with them and Pred is, but there are players on Optic and players on FaZe, or even players on LAT, even if they end up winning champs, where it might be in their benefit, their financial benefit and competitive benefit to go to Vegas next season. What do you think if you're Dens, like keeper cut of those players? Do you kind of agree with what I'm saying there?
Yeah, keeper cut. We're keeping Clay. If it's me right now, I'm keeping Pred and keeping Exnit if I can, and then cutting Priesta and cutting Arcides. Um, I think highly of Arcides and Priesta, but I think, especially with the purported resources that Vegas have, they can go down multiple different directions, whether it's just inserting kicks and then getting one high profile free agent to play alongside them, or going after two high profile free agents. I mean, even someone like Sib, we're going to talk about
Yep.
C9 in a little bit. Like Sib and Pred have worked together on Seattle Surge back when, a couple years ago when they were first coming up. C9 didn't have the best year this year. Maybe C9 wants to build around Sib. We'll talk about that in a bit, but maybe Sib gets to explore his options, and that's of like the potential AR players that could be available. Sib is a slam dunk upgrade over what we've seen from Priesta and Arcides, in my opinion. So, um, yeah, for keeper cut, I'm keeping Pred and Exnid, cutting Priesta and Arcides, and we'll keep Clay if we're throwing that in too.